Before we jump into how to use keys, the UI, and all the available functionalities, I want to talk about multi-keyframe easing curves, as this might be the biggest feature that sets Kease apart from other similar easing plugins for After Effects. And I'm gonna use an example. Let's say I want to apply an easing curve to these two keyframes. I can do that by using Kease Graph Editor or by clicking on an easing preset. Let's use the Graph Editor and move these handles to create the easing curve I want. I can now apply the easing curve manually by clicking this icon here, or if I have the Auto Apply feature enabled, the curve is automatically applied. Okay, but what if I need more control over the shape of this curve? What if I need more than just two handles? Well, with Kease, I can create a new in-between keyframe, and I have now created a multi-keyframe easing curve. Notice that, because I have the Auto Apply feature on, the curve has been applied and the new keyframe has appeared on my timeline. And as long as I have my keyframe selected, I can keep tweaking the curve and my timeline updates accordingly. Multi-keyframe easing curves in Kease are treated as single easing curves, which can be applied wherever I want, here for example, or saved as multi-keyframe easing presets. I can also copy multi-keyframe curves from my timeline, and let me show you why this is great. Let's say I animated a position property of this shape and I'm really happy with how it moves. I now want to replicate the same behavior on the rotation and scale properties. This is a pain, because after creating the initial and final keyframes, I also need to create the in-between keyframes and calculate their values using either some math or by eyeballing the curve. Then I have to dig into the graph editor and adjust the easing to match the easing curve of the position property. So first of all, it takes time. Secondly, it's really hard to be accurate. With Kease though, once I set the initial and final values, I just have to copy the easing curve from the position property and paste it onto the rotation and scale properties. And now I have three identical curves. A multi-keyframe easing curve can be applied to almost any property. Here I have a mask over the solid layer, and I have animated the mask shape and the mask feather using the mask feather tool. Look how easy it is to apply some anticipation and overshoot. I also want to show you that Kease is aware of an object's motion path. Here, the shape moves along a curved path, and if I apply a multi-keyframe curve to these two keyframes, notice how the motion path is preserved, and any anticipation or overshoot is calculated accordingly. Multi-keyframe curves in Kease behave differently from the standard two-handle easing curves. There are two differences to remember. First, multi-keyframe curves delete any in-between keyframe and create new ones. Standard easing curves don't create or delete keyframes. Second, when you apply a multi-keyframe curve, the incoming easing of the first keyframe and the outgoing easing of the last keyframe remain untouched. The curve is applied only to the middle section. A standard preset, however, can target the middle section, but it can also target any combination of incoming, middle, and outgoing sections. And it does that using the Modifier Keys. Let's talk about that. A standard easing curve can be applied to the entire keyframe selection or target a specific section. For example, if I select these keyframes and apply a curve, the easing is applied everywhere. But if I hold Ctrl on Windows or Option on Mac, only the middle section is affected. The incoming and outgoing handles stay untouched. You can also target just the incoming section by holding Shift, or just the outgoing section by holding Alt on Windows or Command on Mac. If I can't remember which modifier key I need to press, I just need to right-click on any preset or button to see all available combinations. And remember that a multi-keyframe curve is always applied to the middle section, so there are no modifier key to press if you want to apply one. Now, about smart easing. This is an option you can turn on in the settings panel. When enabled, it automatically targets the middle section if 2 or more consecutive keyframes are selected. If only one keyframe is selected, though, it applies the curve to both the incoming and outgoing sections. In the settings panel, I can choose to display both the graph editor and the preset library at the same time, or toggle between them. This is useful if you prefer a smaller interface. When both are visible, I can adjust the graph editor height. And by the way, you can also change the interface accent color. Hold Ctrl on Windows or Option on Mac to add or delete points. You can also delete handles the same way. With Alt on Windows or Command on Mac, you can bring them back. If you move one handle, you move the opposite handle too by default. You can move them independently with Alt or Command. Press Shift to constrain the movement horizontally or vertically. I can double-click anywhere in the graph editor to reset the curve to its default values. Ctrl plus Alt on Windows or Option plus Command on Mac mirrors the handles. Again, you don't have to remember all this shortcut combination, just keep an eye on the info bar. It updates based on what you are pressing. And if I press the tilde, the panel goes full screen, and here I can make granular adjustments. At the bottom, you'll find controls to undo and redo any changes to the graph editor. Input, you can input a curve coordinates. You can mirror a curve. You can save the curve in the preset library. Auto-apply the curve as soon as you make a change to it. We saw this before. And apply the curve. The preset library is customizable. I can choose a fixed number of presets per row, which makes it easier for me to remember where my curves are, or a fluid layout that adapts to the panel size. I can also adjust the preset size. Optionally, I can display some text under each preset, either the name of the preset or, for the standard preset only, the influence values of the two handles that control the easing curve. The same information is also available just by hovering over a preset, and it shows up in the info bar. Another way to quickly identify my curves is by color them. I just need to right-click on a preset and pick a color. Presets are organized into groups, and I can create as many as I want. Each group has a name, and again you can see it by hovering your mouse over the group itself. Any curve that I see in the graph editor can be saved in the preset library, clicking this icon here. Inside each group, the easing curves are sorted into standard easing curves and multi-keyframe curves. I can reorder presets within each group, and rearrange groups too. To move a preset between groups, select Move To and pick the destination group. Right-clicking a preset or group shows all the available options and shortcuts. You can export individual presets, an entire group of presets, or the full library if you select the backup option. Importing is just as easy. Right-click, choose Import, and drop your files in. You can also drop the folder containing the files. Selection mode lets me perform batch actions. When activated, I can click to select or deselect any number of presets from any number of groups, and then I can change their color, for example, or I can move them to a different group, or I can export them. I can copy and paste easing in two ways. One is by using the graph editor. We saw this before. I select my keyframes and copy them with the copy button. The curve loads into the graph editor, and now I can select my destination keyframes and apply the curve. The second way is by using this button here, and it works in a similar fashion. I select my keyframes from my timeline, copy them with the copy button as before, then I select my destination keyframes and apply the curve. The result is the same. So, what's the difference? Why should I use this method instead? Let me show you a couple of examples. Here I want to paste the easing curves from these keyframes to these other keyframes. I can't use the graph editor because I'm not copying one single curve. So the graph editor is not an option. But I can use the paste easing button instead. This function copies the easing one by one. First to first, second to second, and so on. Another example. Let's say I copy these three keyframes. I can paste them to this selection using the graph editor. At this point, you should know that doing so means deleting all the in-between keyframes and creating new ones. However, if I use the copy easing button, I get a very different result. The first easing is copied to the first keyframe, the second easing to the second keyframe, the third easing to the third keyframe, and then again it repeats the first to the fourth, the second to the fifth, and so on. Easing and values are the two main components of a keyframe. We saw how to copy and paste the easing. Similarly, we can copy and paste the values. In this example, these shapes move outwards in two phases. Let's say I want to make a change and move them back to the initial position. If I copy the initial keyframes and paste them to the end, I lose all the easings. If I use keys though, I can copy and paste the values preserving the existing easings. You can use keyboard shortcuts to trigger the copy function, the paste easing button, the paste values, and to apply the graph editor curve. If you install Kease correctly and place the shortcuts files into the After Effects scripts folder, open the keyboard shortcuts panel, search for Kease, and assign your preferred shortcuts. Using shortcuts is much faster than clicking buttons. Applying a curve using a shortcut works together with the Smart Easing option. We talked about that before. If Smart Easing is disabled, the curve is applied to the entire selection. If it's enabled, only the middle section is targeted. This icon reveals some extra functions you might find useful sometimes. The first one applies an overshoot expression to your selected property or properties. Feel free to change these parameters to make it behave the way you want. The second function applies a bounce expression, and again feel free to change the main parameters to your liking. The next function converts the motion path to linear. It works on properties like position or anchor point. And it also works with the modifier keys, as we saw before. The next one turns a keyframe interpolation to continuous. In other words, it makes these handles move together. There are two extra functions hidden inside the copy button to duplicate and mirror keyframes. Duplicating keyframes is just like copying and pasting them. This is there because in older versions of After Effects, you couldn't copy and paste keyframes if they were spread over multiple layers. To use this function, you need to select the keyframes you want to duplicate Move the current time indicator where you want your keyframes to be copied and click the function. More interesting is the mirror function, which is also implemented natively in After Effects, but this one works better. Let's say I want to mirror these keyframes, but I want to do it here, on top of these keyframes. If I use the native After Effects function, it overrides the keyframes and the easing curves. If I use Kease though, the easing handles are preserved. And that's it. Happy keyframes!